Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today's video coming to you earlier than most, I think, but players that can win you your fantasy leagues in the second half. I've got 4 guys that I think you need to target in trades. We're not necessarily buying low on these players. I do think you can buy low on a couple of them, but these are players that I think will be constantly seen on league-winning fantasy teams. I'm talking players like Amon-Ra St. Brown and James Conner last year. Maybe not as much James Conner. It's hard for me to predict who's going to score a million touchdowns, but nevertheless, I think these guys are going to be in for a major second half. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to let me know. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel. Comment down below with any players you're looking to target in a trade or with some players you think will be on league-winning fantasy teams in the second half of the season. Definitely think Derrick Henry, I'm not going to list him as a guy to trade for. Very hard to acquire. Derrick Henry's fantasy schedule is fantastic in the playoffs, so if you can make a trade for him, definitely look to do so. But we'll get into these guys here, starting with DeAndre Swift. Swift, obviously been missing with injury, was held out last week. He's a player that I think will be back this coming week, but you cannot look past, the injuries have been there. We saw Jamal Williams steal some inside the red zone touches and goal line carries and steal touchdowns. You cannot overlook how efficient this guy was when he was on the field. He was the most efficient running back in the NFL. He leads the NFL in expected points added per attempt. Meanwhile, Jamal Williams, people I know told me that, Jamal Williams, why do you hate him so much? Well, it's because he's one of the least efficient backs in football. He ranks 40th in expected points added to per attempt. It's negative. He's 70th in points added above average. He's just not an efficient back that once DeAndre Swift is available, I think goes back to his regular role, which was the RB8 in fantasy points per game on the season. He's an elite pass-catching running back who can post 60-plus receptions in a season, and not a lot of players can do that. He was able to be the RB8 despite Williams stealing those goal line touches. So if anything changes there, he is in for an even bigger year, or for even bigger performance through the second half than he was when he was playing those first 3 games of the season. The guy's averaging 8.6 yards per rushing attempt. He's been the most efficient guy in the NFL. I don't think there's an argument about it. But what makes me even more excited, we'll have for you, you're seeing it on your screen, is that remaining schedule is absolutely money for this guy. We're looking at Miami this week. Not a great matchup for running backs, but as a pass catcher, shouldn't be a problem. Green Bay cannot stop the run. Worth a damn. Green Bay is an excellent matchup. The Bears twice. This is a guy who's in a great division for running backs. The Bears are 27th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. He's got the Giants following, 21st in fantasy points allowed. The Bills present a difficult matchup, no doubt about that. But the Jaguars are a great one. And Minnesota, they are 17th in running back fantasy points allowed, but a team that does allow a lot of looks in the passing game. The Jets, and then the playoffs. Rounding out the playoffs is just lovely. Carolina, 24th in fantasy points allowed to the position, and Chicago, 27th in fantasy points allowed to the position. So Swift has a great schedule. I think he's a schedule-proof guy, but nevertheless, we're getting a great finish that in that semifinal and final, I think he's going to do a great job for you to win your league. Some players that I would be looking to trade away to acquire them. I know you guys are looking for that type of information to make sure you can acquire this guy. James Robinson, I think a lot of people are going to be very high on him being added to this Jets team. Don't think he completely takes over. And I think people are forgetting he has a knee injury. That was why he didn't see snaps last week. So combine a knee injury with a guy coming off of a torn Achilles, that could be a problem. Dameon Pierce is a player a lot of people are excited about. He's getting to this really high level in my mind where it could be a time to sell. And Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson's looked great as a pass catcher, but Damian Harris is still around. I think all 3 of these guys are guys I would trade, and you couldn't trade to acquire Mr. DeAndre Swift. So definitely a target for me. Next up, second running back. This is definitely a buy high. Travis Etienne. I am super, super excited as a guy that I was very excited about drafting this year and having a number of leagues. He's someone you need to find a way to trade for. I'll get to a few guys you could trade away to go get him, but he is in for a massive rest of season. I don't think people realize how good he's been the last 3 weeks. 271 rushing yards in 3 games, 70 receiving yards. He's found the end zone once. Last week, he went 14 carries, 5 targets, a touchdown. He's been really, really good. Over 100 yards last week. He's been really good and took over for Robinson. They've seen what they need to see from Travis Etienne, and they've shipped James Robinson out. This is a guy who's now coming into the backfield all by himself, won't see rushing carries being taken away by James Robinson. He's only got to work with JaMychal Hasty, someone he can easily surpass in this offense. And this is another elite pass-catching running back. That is what I'm looking for. It's hard, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, to take a guess on who's going to score a bunch of touchdowns. But what I do know is that running backs who get 3-4 catches per game, who go on a pace in the course of an entire season of 60+ receptions, he is a player that can do that. Those types of players are elite fantasy producers, and he's averaging 6.1 yards per carry on the season. Another guy that's been very efficient with his touches and breakaway runs, 10.3% breakaway run rate. That is fourth at the position. A guy who can break big plays. Etienne isn't that bruiser between the tackles, but he can break big plays. And now that he is the number one running back in this offense, James Robinson not there, he's going to have the carries inside the 5. He's going to have touchdown opportunities too. So I absolutely love him. Like I'm buying high. I don't have a problem with it. But let's take a look at his schedule as well, and how it fares. It's not, something that blows you away, but are some good matchups. Denver this week, who are 11th in fantasy points allowed, or who are 11th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but do allow a ton of receptions. I think they're allowing almost 6 per game. Another team that does that, honestly, the entire NFC West does that, or AFC West. The Raiders, 12th, but allow 7 receptions per game to the running back position. Kansas City, 19th. They allow over almost 9 receptions per game to the running back position. So pass-catching running backs are great plays against them. Baltimore, we were 16th, and Detroit, 31st in fantasy points allowed to backs. Tennessee and Dallas, no doubt tough matchups, but we get to get that championship game with DeAndre Swift against the Houston Texans, who are the worst run defense in the league. We could be in for a very, very good game for Travis Etienne. For Travis Etienne to finish the season against Houston is very, very nice. So some trade options, some guys you guys saw it at the beginning. We always include it in our supers at the start of each player. But Kenneth Walker does not have the floor that Travis Etienne has. If he gets into a negative game script, which I think he will later on in the season in some tough matchups, he will not be able to be a significant fantasy producer and will bust. He can lose you weeks because he cannot contribute in the passing game. Etienne will do everything. Make that trade. You have Kenneth Walker, go trade Travis Etienne. If I'm wrong about this, I'd say I'll send you your league feedback, but I probably won't do that. But you can come troll me in the comments at the very least. Miles Sanders is another guy. His quarterback stealing touchdowns from him. They're still involving Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell. If you can do that, I definitely look to do that. And Deebo Samuel. I'm very worried about Deebo Samuel. I think this is the perfect player to trade for. If you have Deebo Samuel, need some help at running back, go get Travis Etienne, man. This is a player that is undoubtedly going to win people leagues. Let's move to the wide receiver position. These are 2 guys you can get on the cheap, and I'm looking for a guy that can give me what Amon-Ra St. Brown gave me last season. And I think Wan'Dale Robinson reminds me a ton of Amon-Ra St. Brown in terms of the opportunity. Robinson's a better athlete than Amon-Ra St. Brown is, but he's giving me that vibe where he's going to be a player that demands opportunity in this offense and is really relied upon in this offense. His target rate through 3 weeks is 27.3%. Very, very high number. Awesome number to see, especially if you just look at the last 2 weeks. It's like over 30%. So very, very excited about what Wan'Dale Robinson can do in this offense with really good opportunity. And he doubled his routes run last week compared to the week prior, getting him more involved. He's still getting looks. His 32.2% college target share, which I mentioned in our waiver wire video, is an elite number. This guy's still super athletic player too, that if he's healthy, I really think that he's going to be a player that, just like Amon-Ra, you add it off the waiver wire and you just can't do anything but put in your lineup, because the schedule for the New York Giants is this team could win a lot of games if you look at the rest of the way. So we've got Seattle, who are 6th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but have a terrible coverage grade, 27th. Their pass DVOA is terrible. They've just been giving up a lot of yards and touchdowns to tight ends as opposed to receivers. I don't really think that's something that is very predictable. I think it just happenstance that that's the case, that tight ends are the ones scoring. But I think that's a good matchup. Houston, definitely a solid matchup, but with Wan'Dale playing out of the slot, he should avoid Derek Stingley. Detroit, 23rd in fantasy points allowed, one of the worst coverage grades. Dallas, tough matchup. Washington, though, very good matchup, 27th in fantasy points. Philly, tough matchup. Washington, again, very good matchup. And then finishing the season, that playoff schedule, man. 27th in fantasy points, Washington. Minnesota is 16th, but they have the 2nd worst coverage grade. And then the Colts are 2nd, but they actually have the 20th coverage grade. So not as good of a, or not as tough of a matchup as people might think with the Colts. And who knows if they ship out some pieces before the trade deadline on that defense. That's definitely an option. So Wan'Dale is a player I love. And there's some guys here that I think you can acquire him, trade away to acquire him. Very cheap options. Romeo Doubs, one that is really an easy one to me. I think Doubs, to some people, still has that, people want to hang on to him or acquire him or could play him because of the Aaron Rodgers effect here. Jahan Dotson is another that's been dealing with injury that I think is a guy you could acquire Wan'Dale for. Again, this is a guy who's pretty much available on the wire as well. And Tyler Algier is another player you could ship out. I think Cordell Patterson will be back soon, and his role will significantly diminish, and you can take advantage of what he's been able to do so far with a running back needy team. All right, last one. Someone who you're definitely buying low on, I'm happy to do it. It's Garrett Wilson of the Jets. He is the clear number one option in this offense, and the numbers underline indicate that, even with Zach Wilson arriving, even with the passing volume dropping off a little bit. But I do think that's going to change with the injury to Breece Hall. I think that'll lead to more passing attempts. I don't think they're going to ride James Robinson and Michael Carter like they did Breece Hall, but they're still throwing the ball in over 60% of plays, 61%. So it's still a good number here for this passing offense. And Wilson, target rate, 28.7%, which is 14th amongst wide receivers. He's got 9 red zone targets, which is 7th at the position. This is a player they value in terms of getting him volume, but also looking to him in those scoring areas. So Garrett Wilson has one of the best playoff schedules as well. He goes Detroit, Jacksonville, Seattle in the playoffs. But if you look at his full schedule here, there are some tough matchups early on here for the next few weeks against New England and Buffalo. But as we get later into the season or into the season and towards those fantasy playoffs, that's where I think he's going to return you a ton of value. When you look at Minnesota, Detroit, Jacksonville, and Seattle, those are some teams that I think he matches up with very, very well. And as long as he continues to be that lead option, with Corey Davis also being banged up with a knee injury, Elijah Moore is never going to be back in my mind. He's tweeting out stuff from pages from the Bible. He really wants out of New York, so I don't think he's coming back. So there are a few players that I like in terms of trade options as well. Drake London in this Falcons offense that's turned the page to just running the ball on 60% of plays. I really like going and shipping him out for Garrett Wilson, who's just an elite skill set, like a great route runner, a fantastic player with a really good catch radius. I really like Garrett Wilson's skill set as well in this offense. And then Jacoby Myers, who's just a low floor option. I'd rather go for some higher ceiling with Garrett Wilson. And Damian Harris, just with his role kind of being up in the air. There's probably someone who is in desperate need of a running back and does see that Harris could still reclaim his role once he's at full health. So those are some trade options for these guys. Again, 4 players that I think will win fantasy leagues in the second half. Stay tuned next week. This time next week, we'll have some players that I think are going to bust in the second half that we can trade away. Stay tuned for that. If you guys enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe. And of course, go check out our partners and sponsors of the show, Betfred. Bet 50, get 250 this NFL season this week in the NFL and all season in the NFL. That link is down below in the description. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.